Hi, Dan. Oops. Can you hear me? Huh. Interesting. I cannot hear anything. You can hear me okay? I cannot hear you.
Let's try this. Does that help?
Perfect.
Oh, thanks. That actually helps me out a lot. Okay. Hi, Denise.
Hi.
Okay. So now I am recording. This is workshop 2. Today we're going to be looking at intercultural learning in the virtual context and intercultural best practices, both for intercultural learning and in the virtual context, kind of simultaneously. Before we dive in, though, I have a couple announcements that I want to share, some opportunities that are coming up this fall. If you have space for them, I definitely recommend these. The first one is the Silmar Writing Group. I've also put an announcement in Brightspace. So when you first log into Brightspace, when you go into the landing page for IPG, there should be an announcement for this and the other program. So the Silmar Writing Group was created to help people who are doing what you all are doing, leading programs and doing some data collection. If you, at the end of all that, are considering publishing that, which I encourage you all to do, this is a great way to get support in that. They have silent meetings, daily progress tracker, online peer support. So there's a number of different approaches that are used. They meet once a week, and both in just supporting each other in the process of writing and submitting to publications, but also supporting each other specifically in doing research in intercultural competence. So it's kind of also this dual support system going on with the writing group. It's also a great way to network with other people who are doing similar things on campus. So the registration for that is open online. The link is here. Of course, I'll put this PowerPoint, and I need to do this with workshop 1, put this and the other workshop PowerPoints into the Meet section on Brightspace, so that after the workshop, if you want to go back and access some of these slides, you can do that. And of course, with these, you'll be able to access these links. But again, I did also put in an announcement in Brightspace with the documents that includes this information as well. So to give you a glimpse at the Silmar Writing Group, they meet on Tuesdays and Fridays. This is their general schedule. They also use the Hub, which we're going to be talking a lot about this in this program. They use that as a place to meet and share information and answer questions as well. If you have questions about this, I encourage you to reach out to my colleague, Dr. Lan Jin. She is our research specialist. She leads the Silmar Writing Group, and her email address is there. But of course, you can also find that on our website as well. The other announcement is for Worldview Workshops. This is also kind of another training support that we offer to faculty and staff. It's a series of workshops, and this is a deeper dive because it really does get into the specifics of working on your own intercultural development. And then, of course, in turn, being able to take that back to your classroom as well. And I just got a note from Sam. He's having a little trouble with his internet, so hopefully he'll be able to join back in with us. And this, the Worldview Workshops is run by Dr. Aletha Stahl, another of my colleagues. So you can reach out to her as well. And all of this information is also available on the Silmar websites. You can Google Purdue Silmar and get access to all this information there as well. But as I said, I'll be putting this PowerPoint in Brightspace. So after this meeting, you can go back and access that as well. I'd also like to share that all of the recordings that I'm doing, these will also be hosted in Brightspace under the Meet section for each module that accompanies this workshop. Okay. Any questions about Writing Group or Worldview Workshops?
So regarding these Worldview Workshops, so for example, empathy or communication, are you basically focusing on how to talk to people from other country and from other ethnic groups. Because that's the impression I got from last time when we did the breakout. We did this cultural self-awareness, and two of us actually self-identified based on the ethnic group. And that would be the first identity, or the way I identify myself first. But then I certainly enjoy talking to a few other people. We just did not get a chance to talk sort of when we got back to the common room. So I guess I want to know, are you going to focus primarily on how to talk to foreigners, how to work with for example, engineering team from a foreign country? Because I'm from engineering.
Thank you for the question, man. So what I can tell you, first of all, the Worldview workshops that is specifically run by Dr. Letha Stahl. So I'm not running that program, but I can tell you really everything that we do in intercultural competence training, we don't really focus on one specific group. The best way to think about this is these are competencies for helping to bridge across all differences. So a lot of times we do talk about national cultures, ethnic, racial, these different groups that can be characterized along these identities or are identified in these ways. And certainly they're part of the conversation, but we're not in these workshops, both in Worldview workshops and in IPG, we're not going to be focusing on only one. The idea is that the cultural, non-specific competencies bridge all cultures, all difference. So it should be useful in specific applications, no matter what that may be. So I hope that answers your question. So looking at the Worldview workshops, the communication, when we talk about communication, we generally talk about it in terms of the AAC&U rubrics definition of verbal, nonverbal communication. So it's certainly language is an aspect of that, but it's also modes of communication, how direct or indirect. We're actually going to do an activity in IPG that focuses on direct and indirect. It's also going to focus on pacing, how people interact in a conversation. It focuses on nonverbal, so gesture and physical physical presence, like how we use our bodies when we're communicating, how close we are to one another. So all of those things are kind of wrapped up in it. So I think that will be part of that conversation with the communication activities. Hang on for a second. We're getting a delivery. I'm going to close this window. Try to get some fresh air in here, but I forget we always have these deliveries. I've moved into the office on campus because of the problems I had with the internet last time we met. So I hope that's answered your question, Dan. But thank you for asking that. And of course, if anybody else has questions, and then if you have any others, I'm happy to answer those. I think these kind of question and answers help everyone kind of get a better grasp on what it is we do with intercultural competence. It's easy for me to kind of take that for granted that everyone understands the same things that I do. Okay. All right, and I see Sam is back. Welcome back, Sam. I was just introducing a couple programs that are being offered, the Worldview workshops and the writing group. Both of those are available in announcements on our page in Brightspace. So you can also get more information. But again, this PowerPoint will be available in there as well. Okay. Are there any other questions before I move on? So I want to get into today's agenda. We're going to start with our intercultural learning activity as we usually do. Then we're going to dive right into some best practices. This is mainly focusing on remote instruction, but as we go through them, it's hard to not talk about some of the best practices that we also use with intercultural competence. There is another workshop that comes later. I think it's workshop 6 that will also be focusing on some intercultural practices as well. So we'll expand on this topic. We'll be looking at the problems and challenges of remote instruction, some different pedagogical approaches that can be used in remote instruction. Of course, we're going to be talking about backward design again, and then also Sanford's challenge and support. Then we'll get into some specific tips and strategies, and then we'll wrap it up. Now, this is also a reminder to me when I have up something like tips and strategies. I failed to mention last time, and so I really want to drive this point home today. I'm not the expert in the room. I've spent a lot of time researching, trying to find as many resources as I can to share with you all, and I do have a lot to share. There's going to be times where I have more resources than we have time to discuss, but you all have been living this for the last year and a half. You all have gained invaluable experience in remote instruction. You all have your own experiences, even prior to the pandemic. You all are the experts in the room. And I want to encourage you all to share your own tips and strategies and approaches. We will learn as much from each other as you will from me, just sharing the research that I found and my limited experience. And I mean limited as in me being one individual. We'll learn a lot more from the group. Okay, so let's get into our intercultural activity. The first thing I want to point out before we dive into it is this is an activity that focuses on worldview frameworks, coincidentally. And if we look at the capstone level, the description is demonstrates sophisticated understanding of the complexity of elements important to members of another culture in relation to history, values, politics, communication styles, economy, beliefs, and practices. So there are 7 of these. And if you look through all of the various levels, these 7 are listed. So it's really about a person's grasp on these 7 areas in another culture and being able to, how sophisticated their understanding of these, the complexity of these differences from one culture to another. So there's a lot of different ways that you can approach worldview frameworks. You can go one element at a time, and because they are individually complex elements, you can focus just on history of another culture. But developing a proficient worldview has to do with how all of these 7 come together and how they inform one another. So in order to better understand another culture, we have to really have a grasp on all of these areas to some extent to begin to formulate how it is that they see the world. And that allows us to shift our own perspective from our own worldview to their worldview. So the activity that we're doing today is meant to help us do that. Now, there's always a bit of cultural self-awareness tied into this, but the main focus here is about how we learn about other cultures and how other cultures view the world they live in. So we are going to use breakout rooms again. I'm going to do 10 minutes in your small group, discuss at least 2 of the questions. So the questions I have is, do you have any marks on far ends of the value continuum? So this is that worksheet, the core cultural values worksheet. Did you have anything where you were all the way on one end? And how might these be a strength or a challenge for you when you're engaging with your target culture? So again, part of my instruction is have in mind as you're thinking about these specific questions, that culture that you or your students are going to be engaging with in your virtual exchange. So how might your extreme view in one of these diversity dimensions maybe be a strength, and how might be a challenge with that particular culture? The other question is, were there certain values you felt strongly that you were on both ends, depending on a specific context? So as I state here, sometimes we might focus on activities, and on other times we're focusing on people. So again, how might this be a strength when you're dealing with that other culture? So within these 2 questions, if there are multiple parts here, so if you want to just stick to one, I understand that. And then after the discussion, after you share some of your responses and discuss these questions, we can come back. If you want, you can, I believe this should be up, these questions that I have here on this slide should be up in Brightspace. I'm going to check real quickly to see if I actually did remember to post these. But if not, you can also take a screen capture of this, maybe snap a photo of the questions with your phone, because again, there is that problem when you go into the breakout rooms that the questions don't go with you. I can't send them to you in chat. They won't stay there, unfortunately. Just checking the chat here. I like that you guys are commenting and responding to each other. That's very helpful because again, I can't always timely respond to, I can't always respond in a timely way to all of your statements in the chat. That's something I really need to get better at. Let me see if I put these in the meet. I guess I did not put them in there, but I can put them in there real quick. So if you want to have also Brightspace open, I can go and put those in there real quick. Or you can just take a picture here as well. So I'm going to go ahead and send you guys into the breakout rooms. And I just want to check one last time. Okay. And I'll send you that reminder at 2 minutes as well.
So Dan, real quick, you want to make sure I understand this correctly. So what is the value continuum that you're talking about here? Is that from the assignment that we did in Brightspace?
Yes. So this is the worksheet, and actually
Gotcha.
I can show you.
Gotcha.
Are we? Does anyone want to see the worksheet? Just to be clear, I have it up. I can just change my share real quick.
I thought it was useful too that I wasn't so sure of the country I was going to in terms of all their dimensions and how they differ. So I did hop onto the Hofstede country comparison. I typed in Brazil quickly and it helped me figure out a few more things than I could guess. So if somebody really isn't familiar with the country they're going to, which probably most of you are, but I was not as familiar. So it did help me. So.
Yes, thank you for bringing that up. That's actually one of the resources that I definitely want to discuss it when we come back from this. So again, this is the worksheet. If you haven't had a chance to do it, it doesn't take terribly long to fill out. But the questions about if you're on the far end, for example, with stability, tradition, risk aversion, if you are on the high end of that or the low end, you're more towards change, progress, risk taking. If you're on one extreme or the other, that was one of the questions. How is that a benefit or challenge? But if you might be in some circumstances low and on others high, so that kind of dichotomy might also come up as well. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and put you guys in breakout rooms. It's 1:22, so I'll bring you back at 1:32. Okay, and again, I'll send that 2 minutes warning. Any questions before I click on the button? Okay, I'll see you guys in a bit. Okay, I think everyone's starting to come back. I think you guys bowed out a few seconds early, but that's okay. Were you all able to see my shared PowerPoint slide in the breakout room?
Yes.
In
Great.
the breakout room?
I just figured this out, so
okay.
I don't know how well it worked, but there's a new feature in the extra controls where you can share your slide into the breakout rooms. So that might solve my issue with being able to post the questions. Yeah.
Did you ever find out who the Purdue person was? Because I think they're having trouble talking. We tried to get them to talk in our breakout, but.
I think that was Holly. And
okay.
I'm gonna see.
So she can't use the chat in breakout rooms, can you?
Yeah, I'm not sure. And I think we're all back now, right?
We'll see if she puts something in chat. I tried to include her, but it didn't work very well.
It looks like she's logged out. So probably she's having some technical issues, which is okay. Well, that's why we have the recording to back up for everybody. So hopefully it wasn't too hectic in there, giving everyone an opportunity. That I think with Holly having some issues, I moved Wanju into another group. Hopefully that wasn't too much of a problem. Again, we all kind of have to be flexible and patient as with all these technical challenges that we face. I always kind of chuckle whenever someone, refers to technology improving our lives. Yes, in some ways, not so much in others. But so I'm going to stop sharing just for a minute because I do want to be able to see everyone. So normally in a large group, we would go into the fishbowl, but there is only 6 or 7 of us. I think we may have lost Sam as well, but maybe Holly's back. Not really sure. But I would love to hear from each
Sam
of you.
had to leave for his class.
Oh, Sam
Yeah.
had. Okay.
Right, yeah.
Okay. So it's fun talking to Purdue University. That is funny. Okay, so I would love to hear your all's take. Did anyone have one of these value dimensions where you were the highest mark in there? Did anyone have that? How about kind of high on in both? Were there any measurements that anyone, Denise, you're shaking your head yes.
Yeah, I think I said I was high on the formality and informality. That one trips me up because I think when you lived in different countries and interacted with people who respect one or the other, like, German's much more direct. I've lived there a couple times, and then there's other cultures I've lived in where it's more indirect. So
Yeah. Other thoughts on that? What about direct versus indirect? Or let's stick with formality and informality as far as communication styles go. Do you all have a preference for one over the other? Nan, what do you think?
Okay.
Sorry.
So now you can hear me.
Yes.
I think it all depends. So certainly number 9, directness versus indirectness, that is one item that generates most of the discussion. So why I say it depends on who you talk to. So I think that's the comment I want to make. It depends on, and I think at this point, being in higher education for long enough, and I've learned to become more adaptive. And I think that's how it should be when talking to people who come from more single dimensional culture. Yeah.
Absolutely.
So I think I share this with Wenju. At this point, if you ask me if I am I one extreme in along any of these spectrums, I would say not necessarily, but perhaps I can be flexible. Sometimes I may change my view of the value continuum. But I tend to be in the middle along all these scales.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so the next question for that is, how might this be either a strength or a challenge, thinking about that target culture that you're going to have your students work with? So I think, Nan, I think you're right on, very correct with this perspective that it depends on the situation and you need to be flexible. So does anyone else have thoughts on that? And maybe could tie it to the specific culture you're going to or will be engaging your students with?
I can share my friend's experience, not my experience. So she actually had like more like virtual learning, virtual cultural exchange program with her student. Went back to Korea, and it's a professor in Korea, and she's teaching in the United States. So last year they have these virtual exchange with they have American students talking to Korean students. So these direct, indirect communication immediately happened. Korean student they were offended that American student didn't turn on their camera. and Korean students were not saying a lot, but they have those facial expressions. And so these miscommunication immediately just happened. So they really didn't prep students for those kind of cultural barrier kind of thing, like before they start a whole program. So to me, is my personal experience with my girlfriend, who is, Caucasian here, and I'm from Taiwan. I'm very much indirect communicator, and I don't really say a lot. And then she always say, you need to tell me what you are thinking. You need to say more, use more words. So I really can see that happening in my personal life, but to some extent, like if I'm going to have because I'm planning to have a virtual exchange with a university in Hungary, another, Europeans, and they are not American, right? So it's going to be different. So I need to really pay attention to how they communicate. I do see that person is a little bit more like German, but I, again, shouldn't stereotype her, but it's just something I need to pay attention to, or even seriously, I need to prep student for that kind of different type of communication style. So there will be, hopefully less these kind of conflicts among students.
Thank you for sharing that. That's a really good example. One of the things, and this kind of comes up with what Nam brought up, is, are we going to be talking about different national groups, people from different countries interacting and how they will communicate? And certainly directness and indirectness is one of those dimensions across which a lot of miscommunication, a lot of misunderstanding can take place. And thank you for also acknowledging we don't want to stereotype anyone. But Denise mentioned this tool, that's the Hofstede diversity dimension. You can do a country comparison. They have a country comparison tool on their website where you can get these general information about each of these diversity dimensions. In fact, this worksheet is based upon the same diversity dimensions that Hofstede uses in his country comparison tool and in his study. Hofstede was a researcher that did a large study for IBM, where IBM having all of these headquarters all over the world. He went to each of these countries and asked them a series of questions that assessed each of these diversity dimensions, and he gave a 100-point scale ranking to people and their responses based on what country he was in, to come up with this general information about each country. And he's expanded that research study to almost every country in the world. So you can click on 2, 3, 4 countries at a time and look at a specific diversity dimension. Now, to the question about stereotyping, this is something we definitely need to warn our students about. Anytime we look at something like characteristics or diversity dimensions, some way of describing or identifying people, we need to caution students not to stereotype. But what is perfectly acceptable is generalizations, and that is many people from culture X, Y, or Z tend to exhibit or prefer this way of communicating or have this specific character trait. As long as we understand that it's not a limiting generalization, it's that many do, some, not all, and there are always exceptions to this. So there's a great activity that you could also look at that's practices changing from a stereotype to a generalization, and then a hypothesis of, I think many people in this culture behave in this way because, and then a hypothesis why they think that would be, and that's something they can test out and ask questions about. So there's a great activity for helping people do that. What I would tell people is stereotypes certainly can be very damaging. They are a starting point only. What I like to tell students is we stereotype naturally as human animals. It's what we do. It's a survival strategy. Going back to our prehistoric days of we needed to quickly identify, is this something I can eat or something that's going to eat me, right? I need to judge it very quickly. So that's where it comes from. And it can be a useful tool as long as it's understood in the correct light. And that is what I often tell students, it's the leaping off point. You start from there, go straight to the generalization, because you don't want to be offensive. You don't want to pigeonhole someone as being this or that when that may not apply to them. Thank you, Denise, for sharing the link to the Hofstede tool in the chat. So what's also helpful when we look at, for example, directness and indirectness, it's helpful for students to practice this as well and understand that we all are direct in some contexts and indirect in others. I am very formal and direct when I'm speaking to my dean, but and even I'm slightly less formal with him because I've gotten to know him over the years, but certainly deans at other colleges, I'm very formal with them. When I was growing up in my culture, in my hometown, my family, my parents would drill into me, when you're talking to an adult, you say yes, sir, and yes, ma'am, and no, sir, and no, ma'am, and please, and thank you, and all those very polite things. So politeness and formality were wrapped up together. And I carried that through my adulthood. And depending on someone's station, now it's less, I'm a child and speaking to adult, but I'm speaking to another adult who may be in a different hierarchical status for me. And again, that also ties into equality hierarchy as well as another one of the dimensions that you can look at. But what I also find useful when explaining directness and indirectness to students is talking about high context and low context cultures. So people who are low context culturally, they tend to be more indirect. I'm sorry, they tend to be more direct if they're low context. So that is, if I don't have a lot of contextual information, I have to fill it in with my words. And likewise, whoever I'm speaking to needs to give me more information with their words. But people who come from high context cultures tend to be more indirect. And that's where there are cultural norms and expectations that everyone is aware of and understands in specific contexts. You should behave in a specific way. And for that reason, I don't have to say these things. So people from high context cultures already have that information. So when you explain this to students, they begin to see it less as someone's being rude by being overly direct and begin to see it as more of a, oh, this person who's being much more direct than me, it's probably because they're missing some information. I just need to fill them in. I need to give them that missing piece. And that may be something like when we're in a meeting, we always let the senior, the boss, the supervisor lead the discussion and talk first. So you should wait until they turn over an opportunity to respond before you speak. So don't cut them off. So that might be something that needs to be explicitly stated to someone who's coming from another culture. And it's usually context specific. So another useful tool is explaining to students that it depends on who you're talking to. If you're talking to your friends, you may be very informal. If you get pulled over by a police officer, you may become really formal really quick. So students, once they start to see those specific examples, can recognize I'm not just on one end of the spectrum. Context tends to matter. So these are some things that you can bring up in these discussions with your students if you're using an activity like this. Each one of these diversity dimensions have different contextual rules that go along with them. And it's about helping students see, comparing to one another. What did you answer for hierarchy or equality? How do I rank? Even within people within my own culture, there's a lot of diversity. So that helps them recognize that as well. So again, this ties back into worldview frameworks, helping us better understand how we see the world based on our lived experiences. Are there any questions about this worksheet, this activity? Okay, I'm going to switch my share here so that I can get back to the PowerPoint.